This is episode 10 of the Creative Train podcast. Yes, happy birthday, happy anniversary to me. Thank you for everybody who's been liking and sharing and listening. It really does keep me motivated to keep bringing interesting stories to you. This story I want to share with you today is very deeply personal, and it's about how to live and work in a relationship that becomes toxic. All aboard. So the title of this episode is, Who Do You Think You Are? Now you can say that a few ways. Who do you think you are? Who do you think you are? And they all carry a different weight to them. So as this episode unfolds, I'd like you to think about that and see how that term evolved and devolved and took on new definition for me. So I mentioned before in a previous episode that all of the things that I've brought to the Creative Train podcast are 100% my own experiences. It's all the truth. All the things I talk about really did happen. And I do this because I believe that if I'm marketing myself as a creativity coach, allowing you into the world of this working artist who's made a living in the arts for more than 30 years, I have to be completely authentic and honest about all the things I share with you, whether you are a casual listener or a paying client. The life of a creative is a state of constant flux, and we don't often have the, insert air quote, luxury of a 9-to-5 job where we show up, do our thing, and then leave, while someone else can take care of the rest of the business, from cleaning the office to doing the banking. And I use the term luxury, obviously, with a bit of sarcasm. A day-to-day job is not always exactly a luxury. Just ask anyone who has one. But what it can and does afford you as a hobbyist is being able to know that your bills will largely be paid. The car will probably have enough gas on most days, and the fridge will probably have enough food, and your hobby can grow and evolve as it will. However, if you find yourself in that strange and fortunate position of being able to meet all of those same financial obligations with your creative output, then you find yourself in a minute-to-minute, week-to-week, show-by-show, hanging on a thread of suddenly not being able to meet those obligations. Should you, for some reason, not be able to maintain a level of satisfactory output, or if you want to take a few weeks off and, go do some other stuff. When I set about making a list of things I thought are important topics for this podcast, I kind of put them in order of priority, starting with introducing myself and what I can offer to you as your creative coach. For the most part, I've held to my list of things to talk about, but I've allowed myself to deviate from that list when new things or events that I didn't anticipate come up. For instance, in episode 5, called Embracing the Journey, I talked about a neat little revelation I had with an adult student, in which I drew an analog between the flow of basic guitar chords and strumming patterns to learning to print. But then, when you're brought before the specter of learning cursive writing, everything that you've learned up to that point seems to be thrown out the proverbial window, and you have to start learning to write all over again. This is admittedly a little bit crude, but the flow of cursive writing is like the flow of getting your chord exercises to finally start to sound like music. So, okay, that was my dog sneezing. Back to the original point. Who do you think you are? 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 That is a pretty loaded topic, eh? And if you were to ask, most people on the street would likely say, I'm a mom or a dad, an electrician or a doctor or a teacher, whatever else they might answer, usually revolves around their job, their occupation, that thing which gives them the cash to pay the bills. For a lot of years of my life, I would have said, I'm a musician or I'm a music teacher, to which almost every person would reply, yeah, okay, what's your real job though? As if they've never met a professional musician, assuming that all professional musicians are constantly touring the world and making millions of dollars. They assume that music is just a hobby, right? So I tell them that's my main job. I teach music, I play gigs, I have folks in my recording studio at my home, I DJ a little on the side too, and they're like, wow, you must really love music. And I do. And that's the thing that keeps me from getting burned out, is I love what I do every single day. Now here's where the story is going to turn to something more personal. Like I said in the beginning, these are all fully and honestly my own experiences, and I'm going to give you some pertinent backstory I've probably not told really more than 2 people about. Then bring it all around to the year 2023, when I was finally able to admit something that released a huge burden on my conscience and my sense of self, and has allowed me the mental and spiritual freedom to explore so many things in just this short time. And that is that I am an artist. Now, honestly, that seems a pretty simple thing to say, right? But in my own definition of the term of artist, I place a huge emphasis on originality, technique, innovation, and motivation in my creative efforts. I mean, I could grab a block of Play-Doh and shape it into something and say, there, I'm an artist. I don't think those ways. So we're going to go way back to around 1990, when I was in college and my own personal creative journey really started to take off. During college, I met a wonderful woman who was also an artist in many disciplines. At that time, I played mostly bass guitar and was focused on future goals of becoming a session musician, performer, and songwriter. Fast forward a few years, we were together, had 2 children, and life inevitably changed for everyone, for almost everyone. For about 5 years, I barely played music, and I was floundering between parenthood at 22 years old and trying to find stable work in the new small town we had moved to. And that search culminated with me becoming a new teacher at the local music store, where I still teach to this day, some 30 years later. In all that time, my wife kept on with her creative things, painting, fiber art, metalwork, and eventually stained glass. I was always a stalwart supporter, and we had one of those brains versus brawn relationships, especially when it came to the glass art. She would do the designs, and I would do the builds. Because cutting glass is very hard on your hands, and assembling the glass is very hard on your hands. It takes a lot of dexterity and strength. And it's not the cuts necessarily, but the intensity of your hand control is a very big thing. So someone who's not used to doing heavy things with their hands might have a really hard time with stained glass, and she did. So that's why I did it. Just ask anyone who's tried it. So for many years, we got on with this pattern of work and actually enjoyed a good bit of success with custom work and installations. But things started to go off the new course when I started to want to get back into my own music creations. Now, she was a musician as well, and I don't want to sound demeaning, but it was at what I would call a late beginner level. And my newfound motivation and rediscovery and growth of my own skills did not sit well with her. I was able to invest in a few new instruments as well as some home recording gear, and I felt like I had her blessing. But I later found that blessing came with a very significant price tag. To this point, I thought the glass work was seen as our work, but not so. Later, I found in all client interactions, in person and especially email, I was never mentioned or referred to as even a contributor. All of the praise and income was hers and hers alone. Despite the fact that I bought and paid for all the materials we were using, all credit went her way. And I was never even mentioned as a co-creator or builder. At most, I was the guy coming to install certain pieces. I was not to talk about design, engage with the clients, not to talk about the construction or even maintenance of the stained glass pieces. And if I dared chime in on any conversation, she would send me away immediately to do some other task. And this really did not sit well with me. Also, during this time, she worked in photography with a decades-long friend of hers, and they started like a nature photography side gig. They took the photos and printed them, and I ended up making dozens of custom frames that were all placed and sold in several galleries and art shows. Again, I was never even mentioned as a helper. But I had to place all of her things at the top of my priority. Since she had so much backlog for me to finish building, there was almost no time for music. But when I did get around to carving out some time for music on the weekends, she would follow me up to our shared studio space. And instead of allowing me to play and explore and get in the creative zone with some new ideas, she would bring up her old songbooks and make me play folk tunes from the 60s so she could get warmed up to sing. Again, even my own music was not allowed to happen. Then, from that point on, anything that was to be created in music or produced or released had to go through her. I was not even allowed to sing on my own songs because she said her voice was much better than mine and I would just embarrass myself. All the melodies were hers. All the chord patterns had to be approved by her, even though she didn't really know what she was doing on the instrument. All lyrics ended up having to be hers. All song titles were hers. And I was, again, just a guy doing something that she was putting her name on. Whenever I brought up something that I didn't agree with or had a different thought about, I always heard back something like, "What? I'm a musician too. Don't you think I'm good enough for you?" And she would laugh at how arrogant I was to dare to question her creativity. Realizing this was the new norm with music, I practically abandoned music again and went back to her stuff for another 10 years. All the while, she would ridicule me, especially in front of friends, about not having any new music ideas and how, my hobby was so cute, but it was very expensive. The entire relationship started turning very toxic over a couple of year span. And since I had withdrawn from music, I ended up just doing her bidding. And I know I'm not the only one who's ever done that. But if you hear it enough, you're going to start to believe it. One of the most hurtful phrases I ever had dealt to me, and it was used against me whenever I expressed my own ideas, is, "You have your part to do. I am the creative one." And unfortunately, I started to believe that. All of my music had been co-opted. She had all of the income and glory and recognition of the stained glass pieces. I did all of her photography framing, driving, lugging, setting up shows, online marketing. And all the while, I felt I was just seen as what I ended up telling her one day. I was her convenient drone. In early 2017, she passed away from cancer. And we only found out after she finally had to be taken to the hospital by ambulance due to inability to get up and walk or move. And in 4 months, it was all over. Despite the level of toxicity that had grown in the relationship, there was still a very deep bond. There were a lot of amazing things that happened before those last few years. And her passing set me back and totally away from anything creative for almost 3 years. I think this is kind of the catalyst for a lot of creative people who become isolated or very introverted, because they've learned to prioritize their creative output and satisfaction with that over socializing and engaging in frivolous situations. You can call me bitter. For that, I will call it experienced. So in the time following her passing, I filled that aforementioned shared studio space with stuff. Anything to make it non-functional. I didn't do anything in there. I didn't go in the room, hardly, aside from putting a box in there. I didn't touch a piece of glass. I still kept on teaching music, so I was doing music to a certain degree, but nothing creative. And everything just sat in that studio, because every time I looked at any of it, all I could do was remember the toxicity of the creative process as I had come to know it. I was miserable, but getting by. In 2019, I met someone at an open mic who changed my entire life. And now in 2024, I'm proud to call her my wife. She too is a musician, but also a painter, a wonderful dancer, a bead artist, and so much more. The most incredible thing that she showed me, even passively showed me, from the very first moment we met, it's that there is a freedom inside of her, an infectious freedom, one that can get a complete stranger to open up to her and tell her their life story in the line at the grocery store. One which allowed me to find my way out of the dark, following her light to the point where I am now in my life. Fully engaged in music, glass, metal, and woodwork, and where I can now confidently proclaim that I am an artist. That was a really bizarre thing to be rolling around in my head, because for so long I was told that I am not the creative one in the relationship. Now, just by those emotional shackles not being there, I began to realize a lot of things about myself. I didn't question or put aside my creative ideas. I was encouraged to pursue them. And I did. Together, we emptied that clutter-filled studio and completely renovated it to be a fully functional music production studio where I'm sitting recording this right now. We also cleared out the attic space where the stained glass work was done, and I set about designing glass patterns for the first time on my own without needing anybody's stamp of approval to even start. On a weird side note here, that friend I mentioned earlier who was involved in the side gig of nature photography, we got together 2 summers ago after about 8 years of not seeing one another. And in conversation, I mentioned that I was back to doing stained glass. And she was like, She was quite surprised as she told me that she had no idea I ever did stained glass before. And I was like, what? I did all of it after the initial design. She was amazed. She said, oh my God, those things are beautiful. And I said, well, I didn't do the design, but I did everything after putting it on paper. And so I thought I'd mention the framing of their photography. And again, she had no idea that I did any of it. Someone else took the credit for all of that. Even among partners in their business, she was never told that it was me that made all of their custom frames. So fast forward, or whatever it is now, to 2023, when this big revelation hit me that I am indeed an artist. It gave me such a weird rush of confidence and enthusiasm, such a feeling of ability in my creativity. And this is what happens when we're allowed to freely pursue our thoughts and ideas without prejudice or condemnation or discouragement. And what a wonderful thing it is. Right now, we're in the late months of 2024, and I have so much gratitude, so much motivation, and so much more confidence in everything that I do. This doesn't mean that I'm like a massive production machine, but it does mean that I have the freedom and confidence to explore my ideas, both from the design and the technical sides. And I've been able to create a lot of new things in both music and stained glass. One of the biggest benefits of having this freedom is I have the confidence to design and build, trusting my inspiration from the heart. So I'm not looking to like hone in on any online art portal trends. I do everything from my mind and my heart. Everything is original. And just like I said at the top of this episode, all the things I talk about on here are 100% my own experiences. And that goes the same with my artistic creations. 100% original and made with the integrity of honest and heartfelt design. So, who do you think you are? Who do I think I am? I'm going to change that a little bit to, who do you know you are? How do I know who I am? I am an artist. Now there's your pep talk. Go get to work. Oh, wow. That was a big one to get off the chest. Not easy to talk about these kind of things. Whether it's a romantic relationship or a creative relationship or one that ends up being both, it has to be balanced. You should always, always, always seek balance. And if you're not finding balance, something is wrong. Trust me, I've been there.